Imagine a man so persuasive, so manipulative, that he could convince a nation to surrender its freedom willingly and plunge the world into its deadliest conflict. How did Adolf Hitler rise from a failed artist to the most feared dictator in history? Let's find out. Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into the turbulent story of one man whose ambition reshaped the world forever, Adolf Hitler. This is a story of desperation, manipulation, and the dark allure of power, a cautionary tale of how one individual's rise could devastate an entire continent. After Germany's defeat in World War I, the nation was a cauldron of anger, humiliation, and economic despair. The Treaty of Versailles had imposed crushing reparations, reduced Germany's territory, and left millions humiliated. Soldiers returned home to widespread unemployment and poverty, while political unrest gripped the country. The fledgling Weimar Republic, born in 1919, struggled to stabilize the nation. Facing constant threats from radical left-wing uprisings and right-wing paramilitary groups, Hitler entered this chaotic scene as a soldier who had survived the war, but returned to a country in turmoil. His experiences on the front lines had radicalized him, instilling a sense of German victimhood and national pride twisted by racial ideology. He saw Germany not just as a nation defeated by foreign powers, but as a nation betrayed from within. This idea of a stab in the back by Jews, communists, and liberal politicians would become the cornerstone of his propaganda. By 1919, Hitler had joined the German Workers' Party, a small nationalist group in Munich. Here, his extraordinary skills as a speaker and propagandist became evident. He could captivate audiences with fiery rhetoric, blending emotion and ideology in a way that stirred both fear and hope. He portrayed himself as a savior, someone who could restore Germany's lost honor and greatness. In these early years, Hitler meticulously studied political organization and propaganda techniques. He learned the importance of mass rallies, posters, and newspapers to control the narrative. He also developed the paramilitary wing of the party, which would later evolve into the notorious Sturmabteilung, or SA, a group tasked with intimidating opponents and demonstrating strength in the streets. Germany's economic collapse in the early 1920s, fueled by hyperinflation and the occupation of the Ruhr by French and Belgian troops, created fertile ground for radical ideas. People were desperate for solutions, and Hitler offered simple answers. Blame the Jews, blame the communists, blame the Treaty of Versailles. In 1923, emboldened by growing support, he attempted a coup in Munich, the beer hall Putsch. The Putsch failed, Hitler was arrested, and the party was temporarily banned. But even in failure, Hitler emerged stronger. His trial became a platform to broadcast his ideas to the nation. In prison, he wrote Mein Kampf, a manifesto outlining his vision of Germany, the need for Lebensraum, and the racial hierarchy he believed was natural. This book became the blueprint for his future actions, combining nationalism, anti-Semitism, and totalitarian ambition. The years that followed were a period of strategic patience. Hitler rebuilt the Nazi Party, focusing on legal avenues to gain power. The global economic crisis of 1929, the Great Depression, played into his hands. Millions of Germans faced unemployment and despair, and the promise of strong leadership and national revival attracted voters in droves. Hitler's ability to exploit fear, manipulate media, and present himself as a decisive savior propelled the Nazis from fringe extremists to a dominant political force. By the early 1930s, the Nazi Party had become a force in the Reichstag, Germany's parliament. Political instability, coalition failures, and public frustration with traditional parties created the perfect storm. In January 1933, despite not having an absolute majority, Hitler was appointed chancellor by President Paul von Hindenburg. What followed was a masterclass in political maneuvering, intimidation, and propaganda, allowing him to consolidate power and dismantle Germany's democracy. Once in office, Hitler wasted no time consolidating power. The Reichstag fire in February 1933 provided him with a pretext to push the Reichstag fire decree, suspending civil liberties, banning opposition parties, and allowing the arrest of political adversaries. With the Communist Party weakened, the Nazis faced little resistance from rival political groups. Using a combination of fear, propaganda, and legislative maneuvering, Hitler began dismantling the democratic structures of the Weimar Republic. Propaganda became the engine of Nazi control. Joseph Goebbels, appointed as Minister of Propaganda, orchestrated a relentless campaign that glorified Hitler as Germany's savior. Mass rallies, posters, radio broadcasts, and films all reinforced his cult of personality. Hitler was not just a politician, he became the embodiment of national destiny. Education and culture were carefully controlled to instill loyalty to the FUHR and the party's ideology, leaving little room for dissent. Simultaneously, Hitler used intimidation and violence to silence opposition. The SA, the party's paramilitary wing, and later the SS under Heinrich Himmler, enforced Nazi rule with brutal efficiency. Political opponents were arrested, sent to early concentration camps, or murdered. The Night of the Long Knives in 1934 eliminated internal rivals, consolidating Hitler's absolute control over the party and the army. Fear became a tool as powerful as propaganda, ensuring compliance across all sectors of society. The Nazis also manipulated legal frameworks to legitimize their dictatorship. The Enabling Act, passed in March 1933, gave Hitler the authority to enact laws without parliamentary approval, effectively ending democracy in Germany. With these powers, he centralized control over the government, the military, and the economy. Opposition was systematically eliminated, and Germany became a one-party state. Externally, Hitler worked to rebuild Germany's military might, directly violating the Treaty of Versailles. The regime invested in rearmament, creating jobs and fostering a sense of national pride. This not only strengthened his political position, but also appealed to a population still humiliated by the treaty's restrictions. Hitler's promises of restoring Germany's honor resonated deeply with a nation desperate for revival. Hitler's rise was also facilitated by his ability to exploit the fears and prejudices of the German people. Anti-Semitic and nationalist rhetoric created scapegoats for Germany's problems, while the promise of economic recovery and national pride offered hope. This combination of fear and hope proved irresistible, allowing Hitler to secure broad public support. By the mid-1930s, Hitler's consolidation of power was complete. The Reich was now firmly under Nazi control, with every aspect of German life, from education to the economy, from media to law enforcement, subservient to his authority. Opposition had been crushed, and the mechanisms of the state were aligned to enforce the FUHR's will. Hitler's vision of a strong, unified, and racially pure Germany was no longer just a plan, it was becoming reality. Yet, this transformation came with immense cost. Individual freedoms were gone, political dissent was criminalized, and the seeds of systemic oppression had been planted. The road to power had been paved with propaganda, intimidation, legal manipulation, and ruthless efficiency. Hitler had become not just a chancellor, but the embodiment of a totalitarian state poised to reshape the world order. After the death of President Paul von Hindenburg in August 1934, Hitler seized the opportunity to merge the positions of chancellor and president, declaring himself FUHRR of Germany. This act made him the unchallenged head of state, army, and government. Every institution now answered directly to him, and the concept of democratic governance was effectively erased. The military swore an oath of personal loyalty to Hitler, ensuring that even the armed forces could not challenge his rule. Hitler's early policies focused on consolidating the Nazi vision of a racially pure and militarily powerful Germany. The regime implemented laws that systematically marginalized Jews, political dissidents, and other groups deemed undesirable. Nuremberg laws codified racial discrimination into law, stripping Jews of citizenship and rights. Propaganda campaigns portrayed these measures as essential for the nation's survival, normalizing hatred and exclusion. Economic policies were carefully designed to strengthen Hitler's grip on power. Massive public works projects, including the famous Autobahn, combined with rearmament programs, reduced unemployment and stimulated national pride. By presenting himself as the architect of Germany's revival, Hitler gained widespread support from both the public and influential industrialists. Every economic initiative was intertwined with his broader political objectives, ensuring that loyalty to the regime translated into tangible benefits. At the same time, Hitler's propaganda machine continued to dominate German society. Mass rallies, dramatic speeches, and cultural indoctrination reinforced his authority and glorified the Nazi vision. Youth organizations, like the Hitler Youth, ensured that the next generation was immersed in ideology from a young age. Education was rewritten to glorify the FUHRR, promote militarism, and instill racial superiority. By controlling minds and hearts, Hitler made dissent nearly unthinkable. By the late 1930s, Hitler's regime had transformed Germany. Civil liberties were eradicated, opposition silenced, and every facet of life, from culture to law to the economy, was under the shadow of the FUHRR. Hitler had become the embodiment of the state, and the Nazi Party the instrument of his will. His rise to power, which began with small speeches in Munich, had culminated in a dictatorship capable of shaping history. Yet, the story of Hitler's ascent is not only a tale of personal ambition but also a warning. It shows how economic despair, political instability, propaganda, and fear can allow a charismatic leader to subvert democracy and seize absolute power. The seeds of World War II were sown during these years, as Hitler's ideology demanded expansion, conquest, and the elimination of those deemed inferior. The world would soon witness the catastrophic consequences of his rise. In retrospect, Hitler's road to power was both methodical and opportunistic. It was built on the exploitation of fear, the manipulation of hope, and the ruthless elimination of opposition. He emerged from the shadows of a defeated Germany to dominate a nation, proving how fragile democracy can be when threatened from within. The rise of this dictator reminds us that vigilance, education, and the protection of civil liberties are essential to prevent history from repeating itself. And so concludes the story of Hitler's rise, a journey from a war veteran with nothing but ambition to a dictator whose influence would plunge the world into chaos. Understanding this period is crucial, not just for history, but for the lessons it teaches us about power, manipulation, and the human cost of blind obedience.